Hey, in this video, we're going to add some interactivity to an existing HTML and CSS widget or website. And what we have here is an Instagram card that I've built in a previous video, which I'm going to link in the description below. So we're going to take that and add some interactivity on top of it. You're going to see how to make the post likable and the comments as well, and also how to add new comments to the existing post. And we're going to do all that using a language called Elm. I really like using the Elm language because it gives me confidence in refactoring and also no runtime exceptions, which you can say about JavaScript. Also, I prefer using a strong statically typed language like Elm because I can rely on the compiler to let me know when I'm wrong. Okay, so I'm going to jump in here directly into the code. Again, this is the code I wrote in a previous video, and if you want to look at that, please use the link in the description. And well, we're going to take it from there, meaning I'm going to add the Elm language to an existing project by using Elm init. And this little script, it's going to create a source directory, src, in which I'm going to place my main.elm file, and then it's going to also create an elm.json file. And the elm.json file is where you put all the Elm dependencies. So once you do that, you need to include the generated JavaScript file, which is going to be created by the compiler. So you're going to compile the Elm code into a JavaScript code, and you're going to put that into an output file. I'm going to name that file elm.js, and I'm going to include the elm.js file in my HTML file, together with a part that loads up the Elm application. Now, let's create a simple Elm file by just using the browser sandbox. You can use different methods for including your Elm code inside an HTML page. The sandbox is the easiest one. It doesn't use the navigation bar, and it doesn't communicate with external JavaScript libraries because I'm not going to need that right now. So all it's going to do is it's going to take over an HTML div that I'm going to tell it about, and its entire world will be sandboxed to that HTML element. So as you can see here, I'm importing a module called browser for the sandbox to work. And then I'm defining the main function. This is basically the entry point of the program. And then this sandbox method requires three functions. The first function is called init, and it takes the initial state of the application. And for now, I'm going to just use an integer, 0 in this case. And then it also takes an update function and a view function. So right now, I'm writing the update function, which its entire purpose is to take the current state, take the action, and then generate a new state. So the state of the application in this case is called model. And what the update function is going to do is it's going to take the current model, the current state, and transform it based on the user interaction to a different state. And then it's going to render that new state using the view function. So that's all the Elm architecture does. It takes an action performed by the user usually, and the current state. It transforms the current state into a new state and renders that new state. And because I currently don't have any actions that the user can perform, I'm gonna add a no-op, meaning I'm gonna add an action that stands for a dummy action that I'm not gonna use. here I've got a case message which says, depending on what the action is, I can do several things. But right now we have no actions. The actions are defined in the type message, and it's currently no op, meaning I have no operation I want to handle. So my update function is basically not going to do anything, just return the current state over and over again. That's all it's going to do for now. But we're going to change that in the future. So my initial state, as you've seen, was an integer with the value of 0, but I don't want that. I want to mimic all the elements that can change on my page, namely the like icon that can have a state of true or false based on whether the post is liked or not, the number of likes, list of comments, and so on. So here I've defined my model to be a record, meaning it's almost like an object in JavaScript. It has different properties. So the first one is called liked, and it's of type Boolean. So it can be either true or false. And right now I'm gonna leave it at that, and I'll change it later. So I'm also defining a view function, which again won't do much. It will just render some text. In this case, it's going to render basically nothing. I just want to make it so that the app compiles and that I can see some output in the browser. Another thing that I like about Elm and what I'm doing here is I'm defining the type of every function. So in the case of init, you can see the init function returns a type model, and it also returns the initial state of the application. So the initial state is going to be a record with the liked property that's going to be false. So unlike the type model, the init function returns values, not just types. So the type declares the type of the properties in the record, and the init functions returns the same thing but with actual values. So as I said, I'm going to need a liked property, which is true or false, and then the number of likes, which is going to be an int, and then a list of comments. And each element in the list is going to have a separate type called comment. And for now, I'm going to alias the comment type to the string type, meaning it's going to basically be the same thing as using a string, but I just have a nicer name for it. And later I'm going to come back to this type and change it to something more meaningful, because I'm going to need more data for this type to be useful. And there is one more thing I need to do here before we look at the browser, is to add some text to the output of the Elm app so we can see it working. Okay, so now I'm going to compile this file, and as you can see, Elm make takes the source that you want to compile and then an output file. In this case, it's going to be elm.js, as I mentioned before, and I'm getting an error. And that's basically what I like the most about Elm. It gives you so much context inside the errors that it's almost impossible for you to not be able to figure out what the problem is with the program. So in this case, it says that it's expecting a type model, which in our example here has 3 properties, and it's only getting a record with 1 property. And that was because I forgot to change the init function. Once I change that to be the right type, to be basically a record, then that error goes away. And right now I'm trying to figure out why the output that the view function returns, which is a string, doesn't show up in the browser. And as you can see, is because I had a typo there. Instead of JS, I put JSON. Okay, so now I know that the Elm application is working and it returns hello from Elm, because that is hard-coded inside my application in the view function. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy the HTML from the initial HTML file, and I'm going to convert that using a nice plugin in VS Code that converts HTML to Elm. And what you can see here is basically functions that generate HTML. They are things like div, span, image, basically all the tags that you would use in HTML are functions in here, and they take arguments. They basically take two sets of arguments. The first set is the attributes like ID, class, style, whatever. And then the second one is either other nodes, like nested elements, or values, which values could also be nodes or text or whatever. I've added the tags here, and now Elm tells me that I don't have those functions available, so I need to import them. And it's easy with VS Code because I can import them all at once. And now I don't see any errors here, so I'm guessing this file compiles, and it does. Okay, so now if we refresh the browser, we can see kind of the same output that we've seen with the initial HTML, except that the width is wrong, and that's because the initial div or the parent div doesn't have the class name, which is defined in CSS, because the div that Elm takes over is replaced, basically. Is replaced with whatever the view function returns. So instead of keeping that class name that we have here, Instacart, it replaces the entire div with whatever the view function returns. And the view function returns a div, but it doesn't return the class name and the ID that we had here initially. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to change the div in the HTML and move the class name here in the view function. So I'm going to add the ID and the class, and once I do that, the Elm code should compile, and the browser should, or the Instacart should look like it did before. And it does. Okay, so basically now we're where we left off with the HTML. And to make my work easier in the future, instead of manually compiling every time I make a change, I'm going to install a library called Elm Live. And Elm Live does the same thing, basically compiles the file every time you change it. So it's nice because you don't have to go in manually in the terminal and compile every time. Okay, so now what I have here is basically a static widget that's using just HTML and CSS, because the Elm part is not really there. It's just a skeleton that I can use now to turn this static HTML into something more dynamic. And the first thing I want to do is change the number of likes, because that would be an easy refactoring here. I could, instead of hard coding the 3, 4, 9 string there, I could use something more dynamic, and I'm going to extract that into the model. So the number of likes is going to be the model.likes attribute, and I'm going to turn that into a string. And to do that, meaning to convert a number to a string, I need to use a function called fromInt, which is a function on the string module that takes an int and converts it into a string. And after it's converted to string, I'm going to append it to the likes string. So I'm basically concatenating two strings. The one on the left is the number of likes, and the one on the right is going to be a space followed by the likes string. And to do that, I'm using the ++ operator, which concatenates two strings or two arrays. And in this case, I'm getting an error because I forgot to add the argument to the fromInt function, which is the number of likes. Without realizing it, I've introduced a new error, and right away Elm tells me about it. It says that the concatenation operator cannot accept two different types, because right now text is returning an HTML message type, and on the right side I have a string type. So as I said, the Elm error messages are really helpful because you can see right away what you've done wrong. So after fixing that and compiling the Elm code again, everything compiles, but the page doesn't look right. It seems that the styles are missing. So while trying to debug this problem and looking at the source code, I can see that the styles are not present. And that is because the HTML code was modified. It must have been done when I've compiled the file because it generates an index.html file. So it must have overridden my initial file. So by restoring that HTML file, I can see now that the code compiles and that there's a different number of likes. In this case, 0, which is exactly what my model says. And to make sure that this really happens, meaning it's corresponding to the value in the model, I can easily go to the model, change that number of likes, and it should reflect on the page. So let's try that. Yeah, it's now 342 and it was previously 0. Now let's go to comments and figure out what we need there. Initially, I created the comment type as an alias to the string type, and obviously that's not enough. We need a name for the person who wrote the comment, then a body for the actual comment, and then if it's liked or not liked, so a Boolean value for each comment. And that's going to be a list of comments. So to populate that, I'm going to hard code some comments that I had previously in the static widget. And after I type all those comments, the next thing we need to do is for each one of them, create a function that takes a comment and then generates the correct HTML and then put that into the view. So right now, the HTML widget that we previously had has 3 different divs, and each one of those divs has the comment hard-coded inside it. So in order to refactor that part, we're going to need a function that takes a comment and it turns it into a piece of HTML. So the name of the function will be comment, and it's going to take not a list of comments, but a single comment, and turn that into a piece of HTML, which we basically have in those divs, but we're going to move that part in the function. So once we have that HTML inside the function, we can just replace the text for the body and the profile name to be the value of those attributes in the comment. So comment.name and comment.body. And now we need a separate function to render a list of comments because we have more than just one. So we're going to create a function called comments, and this time it's going to take a list of comments, not a single comment. And for each one of those comments, it's going to call the comment function that we just created. So this comments function is going to map on the comments array, and for each element is going to call a comment function passing that element to the function. And now that we have this comments section, we can remove those hard-coded divs, and we're going to replace them with this new function. But before we do that, let's just copy the ID and class name. So one more thing is to pass in the list of comments from the model. And now if we reload the page, we can see the comments right at the bottom. It looks like nothing changed, but actually now it's listing the comments in the model and not the hard-coded ones. And just to verify that, I'm going to add an X there, and you can see it on the right side of each name. And if I replace that with a space, you can see the space now. So basically now what we have is a list of comments that's much more dynamic because it takes the values from the model and it's not just hard coding them. The next thing on the list is to make those action icons work. And to do that, I'm going to create an actions function that's going to take a model and return some HTML. And inside that model, I'm going to check for the state of the liked property. So if you remember, we have a liked that's true or false, a Boolean value. And if that is true, I'm going to render a different image. And if it's false, I'm going to render the current image, which is an empty heart icon. So to render that new icon, I need to import a different image. So here I'm checking with an if-else statement if the liked property is true or false. And if it's false, the image that I'm going to render is the one that I just imported is a liked.png image. And just to make sure that it's actually rendering the correct image, I'm gonna scroll up to the liked property and change it to true. So if we reload the browser now, we're going to see a different color there, which is the new image, and it's a red heart. And to make that clickable, we're going to need to wrap this image in a link tag or an href tag, whatever you want to call that. And whenever you click that tag, we're going to send a message to the Elm runtime to change the state. So what we're basically doing now is saying, hey, Elm, whenever I click this property or this node, this link node, receive this message, and then if you receive this message, change the state or toggle the state from true to false and false to true based on what the current value is. Because we added that toggle like action, we need to also make the change in the message type so that Elm knows what that action is. And previously we had a no op there because we didn't have any actions, so we didn't know how to name it. And now that we know what we want, namely the toggle like action, we can add that to the message type and to the update function. So on the update function, whenever we receive the toggle like message, we're going to update the state by taking the current value of the liked property and negating it. Meaning if it's false, it's going to become true, and if it's true, it's going to become false. But this doesn't work yet because I have a few errors there, and the Elm compiler can help me here by showing me what's wrong. So the first thing I forgot to do is to actually negate the model.liked property and not the liked variable. And then I forgot to import the a function, which is the method that renders the href or the link tag. And then the last thing is to remove the unnecessary branch that is the catch-all branch. So now if I reload the page, I can see that the heart icon is working and it renders the correct image. But right now I can only like the post and I cannot unlike it. So to do that, I need to copy the same link over to the next image or to the unliked image, the one that we previously had, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to send the same message, toggle like, which will get to the update function, and the update function will negate the liked flag. Now, the next thing I want to do is whenever we like or unlike the post, I want the number of likes to increment and decrement. So as a first attempt to do that, I'm going to check if the model is liked, and then I'm going to return the number of likes. And if it's not liked, then I'm going to decrement the number of likes. In this first attempt, I was hoping that the number of likes will decrease by 1 and then come back. But because I'm using model.likes here, the state is going to continue to decrease. So that's not a good option. And so for that to work, I need to create a constant. And whenever I unlike the post, I will reset the counter to that constant value. So I'm going to declare a function called initial likes with a constant value of 342 and a type of int. And now I can replace the number of likes in the initial function or init function and the number of likes in my new if-else condition. And this change will fix the problem of constantly decreasing the number of likes, but the condition needs to be changed because I want the number of likes to decrease whenever the post is liked, not unliked. So if we reverse the logic for the conditional, then this should work fine. And it does. And since we're working on the like and unlike functionality, we can copy the same logic over to the comments, meaning we'll be able to like and unlike a comment. So I'm just going to take the same condition for the like and unlike icons and place it over to the comment function, meaning that each comment will have a heart icon that can be either red or transparent. And the next thing I need to do is also copy the link with the message that gets sent to the update function. But this time we need to use a different message, because if we use the same message, then we'll have a hard time figuring out where it comes from in the update function. So we're going to name this toggle comment like, so that we know that this message came from the comment. And because we added a new message, we need to make sure that we define it in the type, the message type. And then we also need to add it to the update function. So whenever it receives the toggle comment like message, it needs to do something else. To start off, I'm going to return the model unchanged and then figure out what I need for this new message to work. And the first thing I need is to know which one of those comments is the one that we want to like. And for that to work, the message needs to also provide the comment. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. But for now, once I have that comment inside the message, I can use it to identify the comment and change its liked flag. The way I'm going to do that is to map over all of the comments in the model, figure out which one of those comments is the one I want to change, and instead of returning the original comment, I'm going to return a new comment. I'm going to copy the comment that the user provided and return a new one with a different flag. So here I have an anonymous function that checks each comment in the model and tries to match it with the one that the user provided in the message. And if it finds it, it returns a new comment. I don't have that new comment yet, but I'm going to create it in just a second. So this new comment that I need to return is going to be the comment that the user provided in the message with the liked flag negated. So if the comment had a liked flag of true, it will be false. And if the comment had a liked flag that was false, it will be true. And because this anonymous function doesn't look that good, I'm going to turn it into a named function. And basically what I've done is I've refactored the code that you've seen so far into a nice function. This named function is applied to all the comments in the model, and for the ones that correspond to the comment provided in the message, it will toggle the comment liked flag. But this new function doesn't work just yet. It doesn't work because we don't have a comment in the message sent by the user. So we need to update the type of this message. So we're going to scroll up and add comment to the toggle comment like message. And also in the view, we need to provide the comment when the user clicks on the link. And to provide the comment as a parameter to the message, all you need to do is add it to the end of the message and wrap the whole thing in parentheses. So that way, whenever the user clicks this link, it will send the message together with the comment. But to get this code to compile, we need to rename the comment function because we're using the same name as an argument to the message. So Elm doesn't know which one we mean. And that's easy to fix. We can add the view suffix to each one of these functions because they're part of the view anyway. And after renaming these functions, we also need to update the places that use them, namely the view function and the parameter to the map function. Lastly, we want the update function to return a new model, but this new model is going to have the comments list changed. It's a new list of comments that reuses the old comments except for the one that we just liked. Now that we have our code compiling, we can go ahead and test it in the browser. And as you can see, by liking a comment, we end up with the same comment multiple times. So obviously something's wrong there, and we need to debug this to see what's going on. And in order to debug this, we're going to use the log function, which is part of the debug module. And we're going to give it a string as a first parameter, and then the value we want to see. And in this case, I want to see what the comment is. And the return value is something we don't use, so that's why we use the underscore there. Now, by looking at the console and clicking the like button, I can see that my argument is not exactly what I was expecting. The problem here is that comment and target comment are reverse in the arguments list. So if I change that to make target comment the first argument, then the entire thing works like I was expecting it to. Each comment can be liked and unliked separately. So now I can remove the debug function because I don't need it anymore. And without it, the code works just as well. So now that the like and unlike functionality works as expected, we can move on to something else. Namely, we're going to add the form at the bottom of the card to be able to add new comments. And to start off, I'm going to call a function that I don't have yet, but I'm going to create it in just a moment. So the function is going to be named comment form, and the type of it is going to be HTML message for now. I might change the signature later, but for now I don't have any arguments to pass it, so I don't need to specify anything else. What I want now is to build a simple form with HTML and CSS that at least looks good, and then I will figure out how to make it work. And for that, I'm going to wrap the whole thing in a div and then create an input field. And to create an input field, I'm going to use the input function. And in the list of attributes, I'm going to add the type of the field. And in this case, it's going to be text. And one more thing I want to do is to add a class name to the wrapping div so I can style it properly. And because I'm using VS Code here, I can see that I need to import the input function and that the type attribute is not correct because type is a reserved word in Elm. So I need to use type underscore. That's the right name for this function. The next thing is I want to have a placeholder, just like the card on Instagram. They have a placeholder with some default text there. And right next to the input field, there is a button to post a message or the comment. And for that button, I'm going to use an href or a link tag, and I'm going to place that right after the input tag. The text for this link will be post. And now we can look at it in the browser. And as you can see, it looks awful. There's no CSS applied to it, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to make this look much better by adding some custom CSS. But since this video is not about CSS and styling, I'm going to skip over and get to the Elm part because that's a lot more interesting. And the next thing we want to do here is to add a message and handle it in the update function. So for that, we're going to use the onInput event, and the name of the message is going to be update input. Now with this new message, we also need to know what the input is. So we kind of need to have a string there to represent what the user typed into the input. And once we have that message defined, we can handle it in the update function. So we'll add another branch, and the parameter that we're going to get is going to be called str for string. And then we need to return a new model with the input field changed. But we don't have that input field on the model yet, so we need to add it in. And for this case, I'm going to use a maybe string type. And that way I'll have kind of two branches, one for nothing at all, and one for whatever the user typed in. So I could either have a string or nothing. And there's one more thing I forgot to do, and that is to import the onInput function. And now I can go ahead and change my update function to make sure that it's using the type properly. And in this case, I need to assign the input field a just string, because as you might remember, the type is a maybe string that can have either a just something or nothing as values. And since we're adding new messages, this would be a good time to also handle the submit button. And for that, I'm going to use the onClick function, and I'm going to also add the add comment message. And I need to also update the type to make sure that we can submit the form, and then also make the change in my update function. For this branch, what we need to do is whenever the user clicks this button and sends the message, we're going to take the value of the input field and make it stick. Meaning I'm going to add a new comment to the comments list and clear out the current input field. And for this one, I'm just going to paste the code here so you don't have to watch me type it. And I'm going to walk you through it. So the first thing we want to do here is figure out if the input field has something in it. And for that, I'm using a case statement. And if it's just string, meaning it's got something inside the input field, then we're building a new comment by hard-coding the name and the liked flag and setting the body to whatever it is in the input field, and then updating the model comments with the old comments and the new one we just built. And if the input field has nothing in it, then we're just going to return the model unchanged. Okay, so let's give that a shot. By refreshing the browser, we can see that we have the comment form, and whenever we type something and click post, that something is going to be appended as a new comment to the post. But the problem is that the field is not cleared, so we need to fix that. And in order to clear that field out, we need to also assign the input field a value of nothing every time the form is submitted. But as you can see, that doesn't work just yet, and that is because the form doesn't really use the value inside the input field property in the model. So we need to go to the view, wherever we have that form, and for the input field, we need to tell it that the value is actually what the user typed in, or in other words, whatever it is stored in the input field in the model. And we don't have to pass in the model here, so we're just going to pass in the input field value, and that's going to be a maybe string. Now, the value function is not yet imported, so I'll have to add that as well in the import section. But first, let me pass in the input field parameter to the function. And now scrolling up, I need to add the value function to the import section. And then I also need to make sure that the maybe value is treated correctly, because the input field value cannot be a maybe, it needs to be a string. So I need to transform that maybe value into a string. And the way I'm doing that is by using the with default function from the maybe module. And this function takes two arguments, and the first one is the default value that you want, and the second one is the actual value. So whenever there is no value inside the variable, you'll get the default value, and if there is something in the variable, you'll get that something back. And now everything is working as expected. So if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more.